like to think of myself as a bit of a creative, but I'm wearing a tie and I showed it with notes and I have a PowerPoint deck, so I guess I'm corporate. But I was very inspired by Phil, and I want to announce that during that little break, Microsoft just bought Starbucks, Pete's, Seattle's Best Coffee, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, and I'm really into this coffee thing, so I think it's going to be a good way for us to reach out to people. Just joking. But I thought I really am totally fascinated with this idea that like digital consulting firms, creative firms are spinning out retail businesses. I think that's completely under talked about or whatever. So I want to talk about something I've been thinking kind of deeply about, and Frank mentioned I'm a biologist by training, and I'm actually like an animal behaviorist and an ecologist, and so I used to work on things like complex ecosystems and the environment within which animals would interact with each other and stuff. And so now I think of this in terms of business communications or startups and competition between different entities and cooperation and things like that. And so one thing I've been thinking a lot about for Microsoft, specifically with regard to our public sector business, our volunteer sector interactions, and sort of public service and social change more broadly, and how technology affects that, is what are these big long-term cultural shifts that have been happening over the last 5 years or so and probably are going to continue to happen in many cases, and how does that affect the environment into which your communications go? So when you think about, you know, Microsoft, obviously we have all this marketing and we have evangelism and we have a bunch of ways that we interact with the public, but the environment of the public and these audiences and communities has changed radically, and it's not clear that a lot of big organizations have kept up with that. When you think about smaller startups, entrepreneurship, you're facing that same environment. It's just that the way you interact with it is somewhat different than how Microsoft would go about it. So, you know, if you find this talk really interesting, I just want to give myself a quick shout out. We started an online magazine recently about this general topic of technology and innovation and public service in the public sector, and it's called Sector Public. So at sectorpublic.com, I just put up a blog post about what I'm going to talk about today, and there's a slide deck. So if you're interested, go check that out. So when I first came into this job in January, I got really inspired by this book called Chief Culture Officer, and it's written by a guy named Grant McCracken from MIT. And it's all about trying to track these long-term cultural changes. It's not about so much like pop culture and what's on the cover of Star magazine. It's not so much about like cool hunting, you know, everyone in New York's wearing green sneakers, we got to get on that, let's make a green computer, you know. It's about, you know, big cultural shifts. And I want to talk about 5 big things I've kind of seen happening that I think will continue to happen that frankly are changing, you know, how organizations interact with people and stuff. So the first one is just consumer technology as fashion. People, you know, in the IT industry call this the consumerization of IT. I'm sure a lot of this wouldn't be a big surprise to a lot of the people in this room. What's interesting about it is that, you know, it used to be the case that technology companies could just, you know, technology companies were the only people that cared about technology, right? Now everyone that interacts with the technology company affects how, like, who buys what, right? So what's interesting about this is that if you're trying to sell technology or do something with technology, if you're trying to start a new technology and that's your entrepreneurialism, you can't win on tech specs alone. You have to also win on emotion, because, you know, what people think is cool really affects what big companies buy and use, what people want to invest in, what governments will use to communicate with citizens, and so on. And so that relates to the second big cultural trend that's been happening, which is nobodies as influencers. So it used to be the case that the people that influenced the general public and influenced elite people in society that make big decisions were, you know, people like professors and priests, people with this real authority and intellectual knowledge. And then came sort of media personalities, you know, big news personalities, Walter Cronkite, people like that. And then we went through a period where the most important people, the most influential people were big celebrities, you know. What is Tom Hanks up to, right? Now what's happened, and I'm sure this won't be much of a surprise to a lot of you either, is that people like Heidi and Spencer and The Situation and Michelle Salahi down the bottom who crashed the White House party about a year ago. What these people matters a lot. And it's odd, but in some small way, incrementally, the decisions that Microsoft makes or Apple makes or the Pentagon makes about IT and related topics is somehow related to what phone The Situation is using, right? And it might sound silly, but you can bet your ass that if Mike gives a shout out to the new Xbox 360 Connect thing on the View, that's going to move a lot of units for Microsoft, right? So this movement towards sort of nobody's as influencers, or the idea that anybody can be an influencer, I think is not going to stop anytime soon. I think it's more significant than people give it credit for, especially people that think they're very serious business people. The third big cultural trend is generally Generation Y and the Great Recession. And specifically, people that are really 25 and under. How many people here are 25 and under? So like a third to a half of you or so. It's very interesting. I never heard the term quarter-life crisis before about 2 years ago. But now it's a really commonplace thing. Maybe this is just anecdotal, but especially among women. And there's a lot of websites and blogs and hashtags, and people are just talking about this term, particularly people around 22 to 25 years old, from what I've seen. People getting master's degrees, people recently out of college, trying to figure out what to do, and they're increasingly disillusioned with many things. They're disillusioned with their government. They're disillusioned with big corporations. They're disillusioned with, their ability to move forward in their careers and stuff. What's interesting about that is that they're not just sitting around eating Cheetos. They're doing different things with their life, right? In reaction to this new environment that they find themselves within that they didn't anticipate, 3 to 5 years ago at all. So, in my experience, people that are caught up in this are connecting with each other more, using new forms of media. They're expressing themselves very openly about what they think and what they want, often without regard to privacy. They're adapting more quickly, or they're ready to adapt more quickly to a changing world, probably better than people my age or better than people a decade older than me. They're collaborating with each other to help achieve common goals, whatever those goals might be. People are connecting and working much better and being supportive of each other. And they're thinking about things they can do to really help communities and achieve social good and social change. And I think we see this a lot in different ways, in politics, in business, and so on. Rather than sort of maybe the goals from 5 to 10 years ago, which is get out there and make a lot of money, right? The fourth big cultural shift is Web 2.0 and what people call open government. This is also called Government 2.0. So it's this idea that government is shifting, maybe slowly, maybe quickly, towards a more transparent, collaborative, and participatory entity. A lot of this was really fueled by now President Obama's campaign, but this is happening in a lot of countries around the world. It's happening at state and local levels. It's happening kind of differently in a lot of different government agencies and stuff. And so this has been possible because of this massive distrust of authority, this general sense of disillusionment during a Great Recession, and also, of course, the rise of Web 2.0 and cloud computing and the open source movement and things like that. And it's sort of a perfect storm where all of a sudden people want to be more participatory in their government decision-making process, speak their mind about what's going on, and so on. This is actually a picture of something called the Web Trend Map. It's basically just a map of how all different web technologies fit together, everything from Microsoft and Amazon to Twitter to things going on in China. But it kind of looks like a New York subway map, so I just thought it was a cool picture because it relates to government. So what's interesting about this movement is not so much government per se, but it's the value system of the people that want to get involved in it, whether they're in the government or they work for a company that works with the government, or they're just a common citizen or a developer that wants to make an app for democracy or whatever. There seems to be somewhat of a common value system. People are interested in improving the efficiency of government services. They're interested in doing more with less. They're interested in being thoughtful about how money is spent. They want to be transparent about the inner workings of government, or they want government to be transparent about how they make decisions. And they want to empower people, citizens, to participate more in government rather than just sort of voting once every 2 or 4 years. I think a lot of these values are actually the values that a lot of entrepreneurs have in their community, in your community, particularly in a recession, things like doing more with less and being efficient and so on. So the fifth big movement is just what I call the do-it-yourself movement, DIY, somewhat common term. And it's really interesting because of this disillusionment with authority, this distrust that hospitals will take good care of you, that restaurants will feed you good food, that government will provide for its citizens and not go bankrupt at a local level. A lot of people, for a lot of different reasons, have become very interested in different ways in a sort of do-it-yourself movement. Maker Faire, if you're not familiar, is a big festival that happens in New York, in Detroit, in Northern California, in Africa, and it's all about bringing people together to build their own stuff. The guy in the lower right-hand corner is showing off something he made, which is a solar-powered traffic light. We have a book on the bottom, which is about do-it-yourself education. We have a poster from a meetup in Dallas about getting together and playing with circuit boards. This stuff is happening all over the place, and even if you think about something like Burning Man, you know, Burning Man is kind of fun, and there's drugs and topless people, but it's also about self-sufficiency, and it's about ingenuity and creativeness, and it's about cooperation between communities, and ultimately about a little bit of DIY. And I would even say that the Tea Party is sort of a political offshoot of this kind of general feeling. You know what? We're going to take back our government. We're going to do it ourselves and connect our people and tell you what we believe in, right? So we have these 5 things. They kind of overlap to some degree or another. I think these things have all come about basically in the last 5 years. We are in a significantly different place. And so let's think about, you know, how do you sort of promote your new company? How do you communicate into this? How do you find people to work with? How do you get people to buy your stuff, whatever you're into? I think there's a number of different things that are, 21st century is a little too bold, but let's just talk about communications for the next 5 years, okay? I think there's 4 C's. I think one is creativity. You know, whether you're a big company like Microsoft, or you're a big government agency, or you're a brand new startup, whoever you are, you could be a nonprofit trying to raise money for a cause. There's so much noise out there, and everyone's interested in all these different things and always connected, and people are disillusioned and whatever. You need to be very creative in how you gather people and get your word out. And if you don't take risks, basically, I think you're going to fail. Number 2, collaboration. So more and more people are collaborating with each other. The government is starting to actually collaborate with citizens. I think businesses need to be very collaborative with their customers. And that might sound weird, but you know, I think a company like Threadless, which is from Chicago, is one example of how a company was successful while actually actively collaborating with some of its customers. I think that you can do that a lot of different ways. You can crowdsource. You can get genuine customer feedback that you listen to. And I think increasingly, no matter who you are, if you treat your stakeholders like sort of anonymous numbers in a CRM database or just anonymous receipts of people who bought your stuff, you're going to kind of go away over the longer term. You know, third, even if you're nice and you listen to John and Bill and Sarah and you read their tweets and you say, okay, you know, we'll make the cappuccino this or that, or it's very easy to forget that these people are not just individual people that sit in their room and never ever talk to each other. They're part of communities. They're part of a community that buys your stuff. They're part of a local community where they live. They're part of a community based on gender or race or where they get their hair done or all kinds of other things. And so I think it's never been more important to not only help yourself, but also help these communities that depend on you. And so when I approach my job, I think, okay, yes, I want to do something good for me and for Microsoft, but I also want to try to help everyone that attends that event or everyone who reads this article in some way. So how can you bring communities up with you while you're rising? And finally, commons. So the commons is a term I've heard more and more lately. And it's really, because of these cultural trends, it's really become very frowned upon to hoard things, to hoard government data that should be public, to hoard intellectual property that could benefit the commons more. And it might be legal and it might make you more money in the short term to hoard, but in the longer term, it's probably better to give. And so you certainly can't give up everything and contribute everything to the commons, especially if you're trying to make a profit or have a competitive edge. But I think that entities that contribute nothing to the common good eventually are going to find themselves in a bad place. And so what really interests me, working with Microsoft in our public and volunteer sector division and thinking about how we serve the public sector in different ways and how we can better leverage our natural resources like people and thought leadership and extra space and software grants and all these things. What I found is that there's this real common link between these cultural trends and the public sector and how you do business communications and public relations. And I think a lot of it has to do with public service. And ultimately, how do you win? How do you get out ahead, whether you're a big company or a small one or a local government or whatever you are? I think, maybe this is old school a little bit, but I think the companies that win are going to be the ones that show that they care more. And you can show that you care more by better interacting with your customers, by collaborating with them, by helping communities, by contributing to the commons. I think that in and of itself is a form of public relations, or as a book from a couple years ago said, putting the public back into public relations. So, I think people know that businesses need to make a profit, and they totally accept this. But at the same time, I think that people want to know that your business is not 100% selfish and doesn't give a crap about them. They want to know that you're doing some good out there. And I think a lot of that public good and social change really is a form of public service. So I would ask myself going forward, if I was an entrepreneur, is part of what we're doing, is part of what we're focused on, is part of our business model, public service in some small way, whether that's at a very local level or a national level, whether it's for a very niche cause or a very broad cause. I think having part of your public relations be public service is the way to go. And so I'll just leave you with something that I think Gary actually said 2 years ago at this conference. Sharing is caring, and I think it just might be that simple. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.